welcome Abhishek Moitra for this podcast series, which is a podcast series which I'm doing with one of the doctoral student at Yale University. I didn't call him because he is a doctoral student at the Yale University, but I was fascinated by the time which he gave for building himself. He passed out at 2019, gave himself a span of time to recognize what are his talent and what was he strong about. And now he's a doctoral student at the Yale University, with he is something proud because not all people give such time, understand themselves, and go for the doctoral program. And immensely I'm immensely happy because I'm calling Abhishek Moitra to my podcast, and it's an amazing thing for me. Thank you so much, Abhishek Moitra, for giving me this podcast.
Yeah, same here, Vishwas.
Yeah. Let's just start with the questions then. Fine.
Okay. Yeah, bring it
So,
on.
yes. You've worked in neuronics for quite a while now. Of course, we all
Mhm.
were an electronics students, and we just have to deal with something as an algorithm, as an hardware, as in software, somewhere down the line. Whether it's not to get the profession, but at least to just pass the exams. But now, there
Yeah.
has been lot and lot of things where, we have been explained microprocessor as a brain, and when we see neuromorphic chips, they are actually brain, but not yet completely been designed as a brain. Now, I just want
hmm
you to give me that difference between a brain, a processor, and a neuromorphic chip today, which is available in the
Okay.
industry also.
Okay. So the thing is that I want to start with how our brain is actually different from any kind of processor available today. So, I mean, our brain is obviously a low power device, right? Or low power computing engine. But apart from that, it is also like a massively parallel system. So, I mean, you can see that you can drive and you can drive and talk, you can walk and talk, you can do so many things in parallel unknowingly. Your system is breathing, you're breathing. So all of this requires or controlled, all of these are controlled by the brain basically. So you can see that how many parallel processes are being done at the same time, and at a very minimum energy cost. So that is something what neuromorphic computing is trying to achieve, and we are not yet there, but hopefully we can be there uh, with a lot of advancement in material science and algorithms and hardware at the at this same pace. So yeah, and processors are not meant to act like brains. So their whole purpose is to consume whatever the power it requires and do the task that it has been done. So neuromorphic chip is something that is trying to mimic the brain, and processors are what you find in your laptops and other mobile gadgets. So that's what I would say. What is the difference between uh, brain and
I just want to ask you this one question because can microprocessor or a microcontroller can be fabricated as the new brain tomorrow? Is there a
I mean,
slight probability or plausibility that we can think about in tomorrow's world? There can be a
yeah.
microprocessor which can behave as good as a brain. Anything that you
So
want to
yeah,
comment
I
on?
mean, if a microcontroller, if you are saying that, so microcontroller is nothing but other peripheral systems with a microprocessor, right? So the microprocessor, if it follows like a von Neumann architecture, then I would say then it is not meant to design like a brain, because that's not how our brains work. So in a von Neumann architecture, you pick up instructions and execute them in a processing element. So all those things are not done by our brain. That's not how our brain functions. So our brain functions on more real-time data, and there is a lot going on in the brain in a parallel way. So uh, one Neumann architecture is not suited for that, or for that matter, Harvard architecture is also not suited for that. But neuromorphic computing, if you put a neuromorphic chip or a neuromorphic processor in a microcontroller, then yeah, I mean, then we can say that okay, this can be something. But then if you are trying to build a microcontroller act like a brain, then obviously you have to have a large number of IOs and large number of peripheral circuits that needs to interface with the neuromorphic chip, right? It's not just simple. Uh, the whole microcontroller architecture has to change. You can't just replace the microprocessor and just call it a neuromorphic or a brain-like microcontroller. So yeah, that's the thing.
No, but there are ways in which neuromorphic chips are making a lot of difference when it comes to computation. Why GPU was involved in deep learning? Because GPU was actually doing the matrix multiplication, and our
Right.
deep learning has a lot of matrix multiplication at the end of the day, right?
Mhm.
But there was a lot
Yeah.
of similarities which was found. But when it comes to neuromorphic, it's a whole new level of complexity because little hardware differs. Little hardware differs.
Mhm.
You can build it on
Right.
an FPGA, but you can't build it on a processor. But I just want to
Yeah.
ask you this one question. What is an hardware according to you? Because you have worked on
So
neuromorphics, and how do you want the computation to be in order to achieve such kind of credibility?
okay. So the hardware, according to me, is like it's like finally I'm an electrical engineer, right? So if somebody tells me what is a hardware to use, so I'll say silicon and probably the emerging devices that are being developed. So, but the thing is that what I felt, or I'm still learning about that. So the thing is that silicon has its own limitations to some extent because it is not low power. It cannot achieve low power to that extent like other emerging devices do. So there are a lot of emerging devices like memristive devices, and there are no now 2D materials and then 3D materials, which are actually which have been shown, which are under R&D right now, but they have been shown to be really low power, and they can. So ideally, I would want the when the neuromorphic chip is actually fabricated, maybe 40-50 years later, when the technology has advanced. So I would want it to be in like using a very emerging device, a recent technology like a 2D material, carbon nanotubes, or something like that. And I mean, I don't want to see uh, like I mean, there are neuromorphic chips available today by Intel and IBM, but they are all built using either memristors or silicon device. So, but the foundation is all silicon. So, but what I would want is a futuristic design, like carbon nanotube based design, or a very low power, sophisticated design. So that would be really cool to see. Yeah.
When you told about 3D and 2D kind of a technology, I remember this corporation called a Stellera Corporation, which was from the founder of the EDS,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Right.
Anand
Yeah.
Agarwal actually gave such an huge compliment on that, but it's still in the research. It's still in the research. There were a lot of
Yeah.
speculations here and there, but yeah, when we think
Mhm.
of computers, right, it has really changed a lot. I mean, literally a lot. Because
Yeah.
I still remember my Celeron CPU, which worked absolutely fine for me because I was just using Paint. Max to max, I think I have used only Word and something else, which
Mhm.
is which actually never made sense to me today because even though you give me a best of the best IDs, I might not able to code probably 100 lines of valid code. But today
Mhm.
computation, even though if it has that 100 lines of valid code, the computation has been such humongous thing. Like, let's just say a GAN has something which is more kind of in
Yeah.
computation because you just throw the GPU, it just consumes it. I just
Right.
want to
Yeah.
I just want you to comment on how has computing changed today because neuromorphics, yes, to one extent, people are trying with FD sois FinFETs, nice, but like how has
Mhm.
computing changed
Mm.
according to you?
So computing is, I mean, there are two aspects, or probably more aspects, but I'll be focusing only two. So, like, thing is that the hardware and the what lies just above hardware and below the software, that is the compiling system. So I think the major advancements have been uh, towards, obviously there is software writing languages, but they'll work on the application layer. But major thing which is doing the hardware and designing the architecture and designing the uh, low power and fast silicon. So that's something that has changed and that has improved a lot. And secondly is the compiling system. So compiling your code in such a way that that it is being uh, processed in the desired way, and you are not losing your performance on the uh, during the conversion. So you might have a very good hardware, but if your compiling system is wrong, then your code is not optimized for that processor. Yeah. So I mean, for an example, if you see Apple's M1 MacBook, right? So they have actually designed their own chip, but then a lot of companies have designed their own chips, but they were not able to achieve the performance like M1 did, because they had optimized the system in all the levels, and I just focused on two. There are other levels as well, like the application level is also there, then the IO level.
But like, I just want to ask you this: there are a lot of layers of abstraction which is getting built on a software system or a hardware system today. Let's just
Mm-hmm,
say something as a deep learning neural network, which is just in
mm-hmm,
layers and layers of software which is just built on APIs over which we start writing the code. So now, when you think of
right.
such kind of an overhead, will computer architecture and parallelism on what are the new chipsets or the new set of hardware which is required to run such a kind of an sturdy and a hefty system architecture at the end of the day?
Okay, so I would say, like, the most common approach, or the most common platform that people are using today is obviously GPUs, because GPUs are highly massively parallel systems, but they're not like nowhere near to brains because of the power and the parallelism issues. So, but yeah, I mean, uh, the kind of parallelism that you can achieve with GPU and so when I'm saying that there are also FPGAs that are massively parallel, but then the case with FPGA is that the compilation layer is not yet built up, right? So that's why GPU beats FPGA in deep neural networks. So like you will see people who are using GPUs but not FPGAs for acceleration. So, but if you see that FPGA has more advantages than GPUs because it's low power and it offers more parallelism, and you can also design in more architecture. But the thing is that the compilation layer is not yet built up, or community has not worked on the compilation layer for FPGAs. So that's where the bottleneck lies. So it's not only the hardware or the platform, it's the all the layers that you have to target in order to make it a system for something. Yeah, so GPUs and TPUs, tensor processing units. They are the state of the art parallel platforms that are used today. So all simulations are being done on them. So when you see a acceleration system, then it will be basically a server of like multiple stacked GPUs or multiple stacked TPUs, and you basically offload your code into them, and then all these parallelism and everything is done by if you're using NVIDIA GPUs, then there's a compiler called CUDA that is parallelizing your uh, code into multiple packets and distributing it into the separate GPUs for acceleration. So yeah, that's the thing.
No, I just want to ask you this one question. What's the thrill in building such kind of neuromorphic systems? Because we are happy with how CPUs and GPUs being connected
Mhm.
on a motherboard is working, because ultimately at the end of the day, we run it on huge and huge racks of cloud clusters,
Mm.
But
Yeah.
what's the actual hunger which has actually made researchers work on neuromorphic chips also? That's the thing.
Yeah, so the major motivation behind neuromorphics is that to mimic the brain, basically. So we want to come as close to how the brain is working and achieve brain-like performance. And so the main idea comes from there. So and so there are huge number of applications if you see. So uh, the the entire application is actually centered towards mobile devices here, mobile and edge devices. And mm, now since the world is no more using just stationary systems for computing, like laptops and so laptop is still mobile, but then desktops and servers, they are not the only ones which are used as computing engines, but then there are drones, there are distributed computing that's being done. So all of them require, they do not require much, I mean, they don't have an availability of too much of power and uh, much of energy power. So so that's where neuromorphic is coming in, because you want to achieve massive parallelism as well as low power computing as well. Yeah.
No, but there are ways in which uh, architectures have come into the picture. When Von Neumann and Harvard came, there were the new disruptions in the market. It's a new computer architecture all of the
Right.
sudden that human really saw, because it was just that fabrication which happened and it just became and boom. It's the new outbreak in the industry.
Right.
But now, what do you feel about those architectures today? You know, Dharmendra Moda is coming up with TrueNOR technology, which is from IBM itself, which is also a form of neuromorphic chip, which is inspired by brain. But like people are coming with their architectures. Human Brain Project is there, Blue Brain Project, lot and lot of things. What do you feel about these architectures which are still existing, but like how are they serving the purpose now?
Yeah. So I would say that they are mainly the computing in a different way. So how Harvard architecture and von Neumann processes an instruction. So these the fundamental way of processing is completely different. So it's aimed towards more energy efficient computing. So for example, you can running a spiking neural network on uh, von Neumann architectures would not give you energy gains, right? Because that's how, because you are fetching instruction from a memory and then putting it into processing it into a computing area, the processor. So that defeats the purpose of spiking neural networks. So the whole point of spiking neural network is that you take in sequential and real-time data, asynchronous data, and process it in such a way that you are not uh, it, like you don't have to process every time. You don't have to fetch instruction every time. Only when your images come in or only when you receive spikes, you start processing. So that is being done pretty efficiently on neuromorphic chips. So that's the whole point.
But there is an huge and a humongous influence of DSP in
Mm,
neural networks today. When you
yeah.
think about activation function, it's just the related functions which is being derived at the end of the day. What can be the influence of
Mm.
DSP in this technology today? The neuromorphic computing.
Neuromorphic. Okay. So you see that the, I mean the whole neural networks and DNNs and all the architectures that you see today, they are actually derived from signal processing. And so the thing is that with the neuromorphic computing, you usually use spikes to process data. So there are a lot of signal processing techniques like Poisson encoding, which is used to convert the images or any pixel values into spikes. Then there are rate encodings, right? The time encoding. So encodings are like a major part that DSP contributes to. And secondly, there are like when you're dealing with spikes, and you mentioned activation functions, right? And then there are there is how a neuron basically works. It is actually nothing but like a filter, uh, or like or a DSP computing engine. It takes in some input signal and then processes it and then sends it out. So in a way, the neuron or the neuron in a neuromorphic chip is nothing but is like a DSP processing element. So any kind of transforms that you want to apply, uh, any kind of mathematical equations that you want to derive, so you have to apply DSP concepts into them. Yeah.
Why I asked you this was because there is a RISC-V architecture which has been involved in lot and lot of edge systems today. When you told about edge system, it's neuromorphic is basically we are trying to build a brain on a simple edge device. That's the actual thing. That's the actual desire that a human have today. But now, well, risk. We have seen IPs rolling in and out, versions after versions.
Mm-hmm.
Companies have been giving it. But I just want to ask you this one question: will RISC-V, the RISC-V, be the new architecture
Mm-hmm.
and will be the new community flow of the hardware? What is that all about in the RISC-V architecture?
So RISC-V is a instruction set architecture. So when you uh, when you say that I have an Intel processor, so this is not related to neuromorphic, what I'm saying. So this is completely like a processor that you see in your laptops and phones. So when you see a processor, you have the hardware that is called the microarchitecture of the processor. And to in that microarchitecture, you need to run instructions, right? So if let's say you write a C code, C equals to A plus B. So then that C equals to A plus B needs to compile into a machine code, right? That the processor needs to understand, that the processor understands. It does not understand C equals to A plus B. It understands machine level assembly code. So that assembly code, that what is the conversion, what is C equals to A plus B going to be converted as a machine language, is what is defined by the instruction set architecture. So there are a lot of, so ARM has its own architecture, Intel has its own architecture, instruction set architecture. So RISC-V is also an instruction set architecture, but the catch here is that it is open source and it was developed by UC Berkeley. And so I mean, it has being an open source instruction set architecture, you can design your own instruction sets as well, and you can design your processor that can support your own instruction set as well. So so that's the thing. And you have the license to basically build your own instruction and modify the instructions. So yeah, it's like Linux, right? So and as Indians, we should be really proud about of what IIT Madras is doing, and we are like contributing a lot towards RISC-V architectures. So Shakti processors is being developed by IIT Madras, and it's built on RISC-V ISA. And so yeah, it's pretty cool. And about neuromorphic computing, I don't know, because we cannot say, because we don't know if in neuromorphic systems are going to run on instructions, or what the future is going to be, because it's still under the process. So it's hard to comment on that right now. But yeah, I mean, if we can build a RISC-V version of a neuromorphic system, obviously the entire architecture needs to change. The instruction set architecture needs to change. But yeah, we can have a version for neuromorphic systems as well, which is open source. Yeah.
But there are neural network architecture which we are trying to fit in the same old architecture which we are working. Let it be the simple CPU architecture which was there. Of course, there is a new architecture called as RDNA, which came from AMD. A lot of new disruptions in the architecture also, but still the computation units still remain the same. Probably the
Mhm.
pipelines have differed and everything. But I want to ask you, which is the best architecture that you worked on in your projects, or else in any one of the projects which you have done? Which is the best one that you have worked upon?
So from the neural network architecture you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So neural network architecture, it depends on the purpose. So basically, like you have to see what is your purpose. Are you doing some computer vision task, or are you doing any kind of uh, recommendation tasks or word guessing, or the neural network architecture basically changes depending on what. So if you ask a NLP guy and natural language processing, a person working on natural language processing, he will always say that he or she will always say that working on LSTMs or RNNs is more is like the best architecture that they have worked on, because DNNs don't perform that well on these data. So so as far as I have worked on, so I have worked on uh, uh, mostly DNNs and to some extent spiking the neural networks as well. So uh, I would say from an energy perspective, spiking neural networks are really promising, and so from a hardware also, it's very close to hardware. It's like C, right? So how C is very close to hardware, so spiking neural networks are also very close to how, like, it's very hardware friendly. That's what I would say. Hardware friendly, as in like the energy consumed in the hardware. So hardware becomes complicated, but the mm, energy is reduced a lot. So yeah.
No, there's an huge hubbub that edge computers are going to be deployed on a self-driving car. So
Hmm.
now, thinking about that, Tesla gave out its new fully self-driving computer, which is an FSD computer. Of course, there was autopilot, which was running on an NVIDIA system, and now since NVIDIA is a general purpose thing, because they
Hmm.
they provide the same solution for the gaming, they provide the same solution for the cloud, everything. What do
Yeah.
you feel about the FSD computer? Is it very similar to a neuromorphic chip, or else what is it all about FSD computer?
So I would say no. Neuromorphic systems are still under research, so I don't think it will be. It can be employed in a real life situation at the moment. I mean, without further testing, uh, it is quite. I mean, it would be more like a hardware that is more designed towards their algorithms instead of as you said, that it's a NVIDIA has more general purpose GPUs. So when you say general purpose, so it's general purpose systems are can accommodate a lot of systems, a lot of algorithms, but then the performance is not catered to one particular algorithm. So you might not achieve the best performance in every algorithm. So, but when you try to make it more general purpose, when you try to make the system more general, more custom to your algorithms, then you actually make the system more catered to your needs, and your algorithms are going to run pretty good and with a very well optimized uh, power and energy criteria. Yeah. So I think that's what it is. I think.
I just want to ask you this one question because it's based on algorithms. No,
Mhm.
and also fusion algorithms, probably. You can think about like that. There's data fusion, sensor
Okay.
fusion, sparsity involved, and everything. Categorical sparse entropy. It might sound a
Mhm.
little crazy, but because spelling that was actually a pretty hectic for me, because when it came in the documentation, I was like, okay, fine, it's not going to work for me. Because I just want to write it as categorical cross entropy. So I just want to spell it like that. But I want to ask you this one question where all these algorithms are evolving at the end of the day. But I don't feel that they are
Mm.
sturdy enough to run on these kind of local and a colloquial hardware which we were still running. It's like an
Yeah.
old age or a stone age kind of an architecture, but modified through IPs, modified by a company according to their needs. I just want to ask you this one
Mm.
question because developers community want this answer. Like, are we just trying to fit in these algorithms just because of the availability of the hardware? Or is it just a constraint that these algorithms can't run that such kind of a sturdy algorithm? Or what is that all about? This is what my
Mm.
question was.
Yeah. So the thing is that I mean, when you try to build a system that is well distributed, right? Like let's say a lot of sensors and uh, or let's say yeah, so a lot of sensors. Let's say for an example, so a lot of sensors are sending you parallelly a lot of data. So as I mentioned, that systems today they don't uh, have that much of parallelism, right? Because with parallelism, what will happen is that you have to build a lot of IOs, right? So inputs and outputs. So the sensor data is always analog. Uh, so they work with voltages, +1 volt, -1 volt, and in between, or something like that. So they are voltage values. But to have a resilient processing or error-free processing, you need to go digital. You cannot always rely on analog computation. So there needs to be a conversion between analog to digital. And ADC is something that takes up a lot of area. And if you are trying to build up a lot of, if you're trying to incorporate a lot of IOs in their processor, then then you have to have a lot of ADCs as well. So what happens is that the uh, you will actually compromise on the size of the processor. So you'll have this big processor, and then you might face portability issues. Then it's the other thing is that you also have the connectivity issues, right? So how do you connect the sensors? If they are too far away, then you have to rely on internet, or you have to rely on satellite communication. So 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 all these infrastructure, so then infrastructure comes into play. The problem is not limited to just the processor and the sensors. So it's the infrastructure then that there are so if you see, there are like micro level problems that will arise when you try to implement such systems. So that's what. So we are limited by a lot of things. One thing comes up at one time. So let's say you might have a very good processor, but you don't have good internet connectivity. Because in remote places where sensors are used, so they might not have very good internet connectivity. Or you might have both, right? The processor is good, internet is good, but you don't have enough power to supply them. So all of them actually create a bottleneck. So all of them needs to be well optimized in order to get a very good performance in a distributed way. So I think that infrastructure is required is there. We have the processing and the sensor technology, but really combining them together and bringing them all together is something that is more important. I mean, if that would not have been there, then you would not have seen sky shows by Intel, right? That they had made drones fly with in a combined way. So
The
that
swarm
is
intelligence.
swarm intelligence, right? We do not have swarm, right? So I mean, we have the technology, but then yeah. So another thing is that the swarm robots, they use finally the von Neumann architectures, yet because they're easy to program and they're easy. So infrastructure is all built up on that von Neumann architecture. So yeah, so that's the thing. So we are trying to get the best out of what we have. That's all.
You know, there are requirements which are differing. But when it comes to ML, there is a requirement of performance at the end of the day. Whether the model gives 99.99% accuracy, people are still trying to train the machines because they are trying to build something called as an AGI, artificial general intelligence. So now what's the main requirement when we have to build an ML on edge? And how are they different from ML on production with respect to neuromorphic chips?
Right. So ML on the edge is actually, I mean, so first thing is that there is power, lack of energy, or the power source that is there, right? So if you run a GPU that is going to accelerate your learning process, if you run it on the edge, your battery will die out soon, very, very soon. So but if you try to do that same thing with a low power microcontroller, uh, you might lead to you will not have the speed. So your input will be coming at a much faster rate, but your learning is going to be different. So so that's one issue, right? And then the second is that online learning, it's a difficult process. So you learn things on one data set, let's say a car and a dog. Then suddenly your network, let's say your network has learned the car and the dog, but then then feed the network with a cat image. So then the performance of the car and the dog image is also decreased down, because the network needs to re-optimize itself. So that's another thing that people are working on.
There are ways in which deep learning had all setbacks. There was setbacks which was experienced at the end of the day, but we just have tight memories, and we just have low battery devices now. But I just want to ask you this one question: where what's your view on FD cells and FinFETs on the robust chipsets which have been designed for neuromorphics? FD soils are coming up, FinFETs
Mhm.
are coming up, but low powered at the end of the day, giving good performance, switching speed is good, but at the end of the day, we are failing to build such an brain on a burning box, probably on CPU at the end of the day. What's your view on these kind of
Yeah.
technology? How does the material science need to change in order to give such an robust architecture to the world tomorrow?
So I feel like the devices were, so there is like a generation gap between devices, right? So what we see today, the devices that are fabricated and we have chipsets available. So they were discovered like around 5 6 years back, 5 6 years back. So they were actually discovered around 2012 or 2013, and they are now being fabricated, and we have them on our chip, on our hand. But the algorithm level has uh, gone much higher. So it has increased in a much faster rate. So we have been seeing that okay, we are comparing that performance with GPUs, right? That how fast am I able to get that performance with GPU, and we are comparing it with uh, some device that had been generated like 5 6 years ago. So that's not a really good comparison to do, because the current devices which are under process right now, which are under research right now, they have not been yet fabricated. So they are actually able to achieve a very, in fact, higher rates, but fabricating them is actually difficult. So so the problem is like multifold right now. That this fabrication, there's algorithms. So a lot of things need to be overcome in order to achieve things. So the major, this is where like silicon is really I would say beats the market. That is the kind of infrastructure. It has been there since 1970s. So the entire architecture and the infrastructure to fabricate processors, fabricate chips, and using silicon has been set up, right? So anything you say that I have a silicon device, they'll manufacture it. But then if you say that I have some carbon nanotube based device, then they will say that okay, we need 5 6 years time to actually build that infrastructure. So that's the thing. So it's better to compare it like in the next 10 years maybe, that where are we. So it's really infant for the neuromorphic devices.
Yeah, when I told about AGI, the question of AGI comes into picture. Will we ever build an AGI on an edge device? Or is
I
it
mean,
really
it's
possible with the present hardware and the software architecture that we have today?
yeah. So it depends on the need actually. Like, if let's say if an edge device, if I'm employing an edge device right now, the thing is that uh, not just the thing which I want to do. It's but it's like how much do I need to do it. So if I say that I have a big system, right? I have a big system which I know is uh, uh, very trustworthy, or uh, it's resilient, it's robust, right? And if let's say I have a small device, right, which I know can fail, right? It can fail but can work on the edge, right? So building, I mean, the question is, how would you want to have like a 99% accuracy and spend more on the hardware or a research and R&D on that small device, or building your bigger system more robust in order to have a higher accuracy? Like, I don't know that if that makes sense, but like what I'm trying to say is that if you want to go higher accuracy, then it's better to have a more robust system that gives you a higher accuracy. And edge devices may suffer vulnerability issues because they are on the edge, they are not secure. So that's what. So you just want them to actually do some small processing on the edge and send back what is relevant information to a local system which is doing all the rest of the processing. So but yeah, I mean, if even if you're looking at self-driving cars, then the the robust system would be inside the car, which is running on a proper system. So that would be a robust system. But some sensor, which is a processor fused with the sensor, which is just detecting lanes or something. So that does not have to be that accurate. It can the whole purpose could be just just detect lines, and anything that comes into line comes off as a line. You just send it to the main processor and maybe reduce the data bandwidth and make some simple assumptions using that. So that's my point.
No, there are ways in which APIs have made the disruptions in the market. When once TensorFlow was open source, the game of technology changed because until and unless companies thought of keeping it proprietary because they thought, okay, this is something humongous that we have built. And now when the TensorFlow was open source, everything changed. So now I just want to ask you this one
Yeah.
question. What kind of APIs are we supposed to build in order to survive in the field of edge computing and also in neuromorphic also?
Okay, so the one thing is that edge computing needs to be more secure, because being on the edge, you can you can have a very a lot of attackers can attack the edge system, right? So first API is that you have to have a very secure API. The API has to be very secure so that you nobody else can actually intrude and uh, give way to the system, give access to the main system. Second thing is that the API would be to actually the file transfer, right? That how are you like inferring, and what is the data that you want to uh, get from the edge device. And second, another thing that I'm thinking is that let's say mm, the APIs really need to be governed. Like what is the data that we are trying to get from the edge device? Is it some personal information or anything? So the API needs to also be governed or controlled in a community manner, so that we get uh, everybody knows what is the kind of API that is being run, and what is the data that is being accessed. So that is another thing I feel. So if, edge computing on the software level I think, should have these APIs.
Yeah, I know. when you told about APIs, it was fine. It needs to be secure. It needs to be everything. But learnability. I'll come back to the learnability. Will Edge
Right.
and AI make the neural network for babies reality? Because I just want the community workflow to be in such a way that everybody needs to learn this at the end of the day. It's like, I was interviewing a virologist, and he was learning computation today. When you think of such kind of
Right.
people moving towards the computers, right? He himself had thought, I'll
Mhm.
never work on computer, that's not my field.
Mhm.
And today everybody needs a computer. Thanks thanks
Yeah.
to Charles Babbage, who he just gave the computer and we are just rolling it in and out for the number crunching. Will it be the
Right.
reality of getting the neural network for babies?
So, you mean neuromorphic system, neuromorphic
Yes.
chips, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, if you see, then we are also like the babies, and we are trying to achieve access the neuromorphic system. So, I mean, we don't have to look at what the neuromorphic chip is actually doing, or what is being run on, or how things are being run. So, if how the DNN compilation system has compiling softwares have evolved over the last decade, if the same thing happens with neuromorphic as well. After all, it's like the compiling system, or the compiler is actually is the one that isolates the hardware from the software, right? So the compiler is what takes care of all the codes, and does all the compiling to be run on the hardware. So if that is being done, if that evolves to that extent, then I mean, I'm sure, definitely you can access a neuromorphic chips. In fact, there have been a lot of compilers that have been designed for neuromorphic system. In fact, you can access True North and from remote places as well. So that's what. So you need just to run this algorithm and see how it works. That's all. So
I just want to ask you this one question. FPGA is more compared to the fuel of your neuromorphic today. If it's something which is to be do with neuromorphics in terms of research, yes, FPGAs come into the picture. Is
mhm,
FPGA more compact but costs? It really costs, because 15,000 for an
mhm,
FPGA for such an uh, not so good processing with not so good enough clock. Probably you can take
yeah.
an laptop in that cost, right? What is the trend today? Is it an ASIC or an GPU which is going to replace the FPGAs?
So the thing is that I want to correct you here. Although you're not having a lot of clock speed in an FPGA, but let's say you have a clock speed of 200 megahertz, right? But your CPU has a clock speed of say in few gigahertz, right? So it's let's say around 10 to 20 times higher than an FPGA clock. But then let's say what kind of uh, I mean, uh, why FPGAs can be beneficial is that because although you are having a lower clock speed, but you can increase the parallelism. So you can have multiple blocks that do the same thing. Now, it depends. Like if you have a very sequential code, that is one thing, the previous statement needs to be completed before running the next statement, then FPGAs and CPUs will perform the same, and in that case you don't have to spend money on on a FPG. But if you see that you have a lot of parallelism available in your code, then even with a lower clock cycle, you can effectively increase the throughput, that is the amount of the number of outputs that you're able to achieve uh, in using an FPG. So I'll give an example. So for example, let's say you have 100 images to process, right? So how a CPU will do is that, let's say the CPU has 4 cores. So it can process at max 4 images at a time to the best. But uh, in a FPGA, you can create 100 parallel channels, and you can do that same thing in let's say in that same amount of time. So let's say one image gets processed in one clock cycle. That is just an assumption I'm taking. So then it takes around 10 nanoseconds to process each image, right? So the CPU will actually take around CPU will take around, so there are 4 cores, so it will take 25 nanoseconds, right, to process 100 images. But then uh, the FPGA will take just 1 nanosecond, just 10 nanoseconds, right? And the CPU will take 250 nanoseconds. Sorry. So it's a 25 times faster. FPGA is 25 times faster. So so the entire taste of FPGA comes when you have the parallelism. So that's why I think FPGA is an FPGA has a lot of architecture uh, hardware that needs to be there for these parallelism and interconnections and everything. So that's why they cost a lot, but it depends on the application that you're trying to implement it on.
Which can
So
replace potentially? Is it an
sorry.
ASIC? Which can really replace an FPGA today? Is it an ASIC or an GPU?
Yeah.
Like according to the
So
purpose.
yeah. So ASIC is more when you have you really know what kind. So you have just one algorithm or few sets of algorithm, and you really want to make it very secure, and you don't want anybody to know what easily infer the hardware and everything, and you want to just hardwire everything to just run without any reconfiguration uh, features. So then ASIC comes into play, but ASIC is much more faster than FPGA, but it lacks the reconfigurability or the general purposeness, right? And when you compare it with the GPUs, then uh, GPUs are finally von Neumann architectures. So FPGA is also von Neumann architectures, but the after all the architecture is fixed in a GPU. You cannot have, let's say, you have 100 channels, but you cannot have more than 100 channels if you want. And let's say your application requires 1,000 channels, then you can have an FPGA which is bigger and which has 1,000 channels, or you can even have 10,000 channels, right? I mean, you can program it that way compared to when you have GPU, which has just 100 GPU, 100 channels. So you need to do it in 10 steps in that way. So that's the thing. The FPGAs are good for prototyping and really knowing what your architecture should be, and then comes the ASIC. So ASIC is when you know that okay, this is going to be my architecture, and I want to fix it. I don't want to change things any further. So then ASIC comes into the picture. And GPUs are good for like when you don't want to go into much of hardware architecture or the microarchitecture level. You just want to run your code and let the you just at max you want to go down to the compilation layer. That's all. So then I think GPUs are the best.
I just want to ask you this one question because you have talked a lot on compilers, but I want to go a little bit on kernels. Is Linux
Mhm.
kernel secure enough to actually deliver an sturdy edge device, or else what is it all about? Is it really secure?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is secure. I mean, I've not read a lot of research paper on this, but I mean, I cannot comment a lot on the security of Linux, but I would say like uh, there are a lot of. I mean, all of so far what I've seen is that people are using Linux for edge devices. So because Linux offers a lot of it's being an open source. It has a lot of kernels that are available to it, right? So the community is actually developing the edge algorithm, the kernels to support edge algorithms. That is actually helping the Linux to be deployed in edge devices. So I would say, yeah, it's secure, and if you have the proper security measures, definitely. But you never know. Like, there are vulnerabilities as well, but then there are other ways to tackle them at the same time.
You know, there is a lot and lot of ways in which there is a demand which industry has created for Verilog and VHDL. There is
Mhm.
demand for both. There is
Yeah.
demand for both at the end of the day.
Mhm.
What do you feel about the requirements, and what do you feel about which is more sturdy enough to deliver us a better neuromorphic chip? Is it in Verilog or in VHDL? Or you can comment it
So
based on the purpose which we are building upon.
yeah, so I think does not really matter whether you use Verilog or VHDL, because again, Verilog and VHDL are high-level languages. There is again a compiler that converts it into the RTL. So basically, the Verilog and VHDL codes both get compiled using their individual compilers into RTL code, or the netlist, and the what we call it as a netlist. So it really does not matter what you use for the code.
So thinking of code, right? Will System Verilog make its way to be be our make our dream for getting the printable hardwares, and also what sort of an compilers are required for ASCII in order to get such an huge and humongously and fascinating architecture on a set of silicon chipsets? What's that actual requirement that we are looking for from the compilers, leaving the compilers potential that we have found today?
So the first part of your question was uh,
System
for
Verilog.
system Verilog. Okay, so the system Verilog is more like a higher level than Verilog. So Verilog and VHDL are difficult languages to code in. So what? Not difficult. It would say it would. I meant to say that it's more for the hardware folks that we code on. But let's say you want to, let's say a software engineer wants to uh, design his own hardware, right? So he does not want to go much into the details of how the hardware, how the flip flops and the registers are going to be, and all those connections. So what he does is that he writes his own high level code, and there's another compiler that converts that code into RTL. So that is, I would say, that is like the Python of hardware. So Verilog is like the C of hardware. So it's very close to. So there's just one step that you need to take from the Verilog code to the RTL. But then when you come to the Python, when you come to the system Verilog, you need to jump steps. So the compilation process is more hefty, and still research is going on to how to have a better, more efficient compilation. And yeah. And what was the second question?
The second question was, is it really feasible for us to get such an software on building such an hardware like ASICs or else any silicon chip for the neuromorphic?
Yeah, so it is actually, because finally the what Verilog does is that it basically connects different uh, systems, different subsystems and the systems in the hardware. And so that's what essentially Verilog does, right? So and also it generates uh, I mean, it is basically a hardware descriptive language, right? So all the where the components are going to be, which point of which ports of the hardware is going to be connected by what. So it's a connection uh, software, to be honest. And so yeah, I mean, if a neuromorphic system will also have a lot of connections between devices, and you can actually uh, do those connections using any of those hardware descriptive languages.
When you told about the processors and you compare system Verilog to to the Python of the hardware folks,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like the new compiler. It's just like an actual compiler which is behaving like an interpreter. That's the Python for the
Yeah.
hardware folks. Now, I just want to ask you this one question, because there are LUTs, lookup tables, which were defined, PetriNet models, which was rolling in and out of the embedded world, and also flow diagrams were there. Are
Mhm.
these just processors still in use, or else is it just like I have a set of architecture in my mind, I'm just going to build it. I'm not going to see all
Mm.
these. Also,
Yeah,
are the industry people still using this?
yeah. So it's a good question. So this uh, these are the fundamentals, right? When you see a flow diagram or the lookup tables, these are the fundamentals. So you can use a system Verilog, right? So I'll give an example. For example, like let's say you do a if let's say if you see a CUDA compiler, right? It's written in C++. It's not written in Python. So what happens is that Python codes are getting converted to C++ and then being uh, transferred to the GPUs. Why? Because C++ is something that is very close to hardware, and converting from C++ or C code to a machine level code is very easy and very efficient. But so that's why Python is being the backend of Python is actually C. So so that's the thing. So the similar thing is actually done in hardware as well. So system Verilog, you don't have it's like it's on an abstraction. You don't have to worry about the hardwares and everything, but you just have to write your functionality. But when the compiler comes in, it takes into account all the flow diagrams and then the timing mismatch, right? And delays, static timing analysis, and then how the lookup tables are going to be arranged as. So really, hardware is never going to be getting rid of lookup tables and all these things, because FPGAs, right? They essentially work on lookup tables. So yeah, so I mean, for maybe for software people, they don't have to worry about lookup tables and all these hardware jargons, but for hardware people, it's going to be a necessity during creation of a hardware. And flow diagrams are like the uh, crux of every hardware, because you need to actually understand where your data is flowing through, and if there is any kind of a delay that is being offered by individual components in that path. So you need to understand the flow diagram before understanding, how to get your system to finally work properly.
Yeah, when you told about all these, I just had this one question because Chip was coming out with the $9 compute stick. It was like
Mm-hmm.
a neural compute stick which Intel gave, but it's like a kind of a chipset which you can build upon. It was a $9 computer on an handheld chip. But I just want to ask you this one question because it had used Pentium architecture at the end of the day to build such a minimalistic board. I just want to ask you this one question. In future, can we use the same old architecture and build a minimalistic board? Or how is the possibility of building that?
So it depends, right? So like if you see that your algorithms, right? Your algorithms or your algorithm. The thing is that why couldn't we do neural networks back in the 90s? Right? Why did it come up suddenly in 2012? Neural networks were there since 1950s, I think, right? So, but the idea of the implementation of deep neural networks came into existence in 2012 because the architecture evolved, right? So the algorithms, if let's say if you're doing something in future, definitely it would be something futuristic, right? You need to do something which involves intelligence, which involves inference, or something like that. So it depends. Like your algorithm, if it is too complicated, then working on a uh, older architecture would be difficult, like a Pentium architecture. But then it would require more parallel architecture, more improved instruction set. So all these things will come into picture. But if your application is small, if you need to just do small, simple tasks, then and also in a collective way. So then I think older processors will do just fine. That's not a problem.
Jake, for this amazing podcast. This is my first podcast with a neuromorphic person. No, I've never interviewed a researcher who's working on neuromorphic chipset, also on neuromorphic computing at the end of the day. And thank you so much for this amazing podcast and your valuable time spending with me, giving me
Yeah,
some
that's my pleasure.
podcast, give me some answers to the silly questions which I asked, but yet it gave a lot of insights at the end of the day to me. Thank you so much.
You were really a good host, and thank you for inviting me.